John chapter 13. We'll start up where we left off last Wednesday night. I'm going to put it up there, Lord.
I'm going to wait to see.
Yeah, I wasn't going to put it up there until I saw your face.
I don't know if that's good or bad.
Well, that's a good thing.
Yes,
Come on. Okay,
Gary.
good. Okay, John chapter 13. This, of course, is the Passover Jewish celebration of God's deliverance of the children of Israel out of bondage. And this is Jesus with the 12 celebrating this Passover time just before the time of his crucifixion. So he's celebrated with these disciples each of the years that since his baptism, since he has called them, they have been together during Passover time, and he's come to Jerusalem as all the men were to do. And they have gathered together before in if not this same upper room, in a similar kind of setting, and have celebrated the Passover. But this one is different. And there is a sense among the apostles that it's different. The things that Jesus has said to them just prior to the time of the Feast of the Passover, when Tabernacles was being celebrated and all of that, seemed to imply that something was coming to a head. And of course, at times, Jesus has dropped all kinds of parables and figurative speech and just simply told them they're going to Jerusalem to die. And he has carefully explained that to them. They have been very hesitant and reluctant to accept the reality of that, but they're in that process that we're looking at tonight, continuing to look at. And Jesus has said some things to them. We got to verse 21, and when Jesus had said those things previous to verse 21, he was troubled in spirit. There were some things that were bothering our Lord, and they were weighing upon his mind. It's hard to think of things weighing upon the mind of God, things that we try when we are troubled by certain problems and difficulties in life. We try to push them off, compartmentalize them, and deal with them that way. But not so here. I mean, these were things that were bothering the Lord. And one of the things is mentioned specifically here in verse 21. And so he tells them this. Verily, verily, truly, truly, I say unto you that one of you shall betray me. And they looked one on another, verse 22, doubting of whom he spake. They could not imagine. Nobody said immediately that it was Judas, because nobody thought it was Judas. They didn't think it was Bartholomew or any of the other guys either, James, either of the Jameses. If they had thought of anybody, they might have thought of Peter, because of all of the apostles of the Lord, the one that Jesus had corrected the most, at least in the scripture, was Peter. And so maybe Peter would be the one, because he's often rash in his judgment, responds quickly without thinking, and perhaps Peter maybe, but they didn't know. They couldn't say for sure who they figured out that would be. So this was troubling to the Lord. Not the fact so much of his coming crucifixion, but he could bear pain as much as anybody else could. He could die nobly as much as anybody else could. But what he was doing there was more than just dying. He was bearing the sins of the people. Not just a few people, but the sins of all people of all time. Back to the first sin of Adam and Eve, down to the last sin that will be committed before the Lord comes again. And so he was bearing all of those sins in his own body as he hung upon the cross. That was for he who knew no sin, for him, as the scriptures say, to become sin for us. That's just a phrase to us in terms of how that would impact him or what that would mean. But he became sin for us. And so all of that of all time heaped upon him, and him bearing all of that while he was upon the cross, and Jesus knowing that that was what was coming. I don't know at what point that actually occurred on the cross, and neither does anybody else. But at some point on the cross, the full weight of that bore down on him. He was, as some say, probably true, that it was at that point that the full weight of that sin bore down upon him, that he asked God, "Why have you forsaken me, my God, why have you forsaken me?" and that at that time, God, who turned away from Jesus and the sight of him bearing all of that sin, embraced the reality of what the blood of Christ was doing, which was to take away that sin. And so to come back to his Son then, having dealt with the issue of sin in the blood of his Son. So they're not sure exactly who it is that was doing this wrong. And the reality of Judas's coming betrayal was troubling to him. What bothers us the most, generally speaking, is when someone we love and care for, one of our kids or grandkids or something like that, is about to do something and we can see that they are, they're making a big mistake. And they're not listening to anybody, won't pay any attention to anybody, and so the mistake and the penalty of that mistake is going to come down hard on them. That troubles us when that occurs. It's not trouble that we have brought upon ourselves particularly, but trouble because of the care that we have for other people and the hurt that can come from that. Verse 22, verse 23, okay, there was leaning on Jesus' bosom one of his disciples whom Jesus loved. Yeah. Simon Peter therefore beckoned to him that he should ask who it should be of whom he spake. Who is this one that Jesus loved? He loved all of them. Okay, John. John doesn't brag on himself in his own gospel. He doesn't mention John in his own gospel, but he does mention this one. And when he refers to himself, he refers to him this way. In his own sense, saying how marvelous it was that he could understand that Jesus loved him, despite his weaknesses and his failings. So he referred to himself that way. That was the greatest honor that John could know in terms of describing himself. And he was leaning on Jesus' bosom, and Peter is beckoning to him in verse 24 that he should ask who it should be of whom he spake. So while they're around the table, all of this is going on in an effort to try and find out what Jesus means by one of them betraying him and what's the implications of that. And Jesus loved John. Who was in the inner circle, as we sometimes speak of the inner circle among the apostles? Peter, James, and John. Those three names just seem to go together. They roll off of our tongues. Peter, James, and John went with Jesus places where others did not go, were not invited to go evidently, and so they would accompany Jesus to those places. The Mount of Transfiguration, I'm sure the other 9 would have liked to have seen what Peter, James, and John got to see up on top of that mountain, but they didn't get to see it because they were not invited to come, or they were doing other stuff or whatever, but they didn't get to see. Did Jesus play favorites? Well, I don't know if you call that playing favorites. We all have people that we like better than others. People that we love more than we love others. Some that we have a great deal of difficulty even describing our feeling toward them with the word love. That's okay. Some we are closer to than we are close to others. Jesus had his inner circle. They were a comfort to him. He understood because he was God in the flesh, but he understood the nature of these 3 men that he kept in close company to himself, and what an asset they were to him, particularly when he was troubled during these times. And John was one of those 3 that was experiencing that trouble. And this was occurring while they were around the table. I tried to describe the table to you, the U-shaped table and not chairs like we normally think of chairs and whatnot, but usually a picture is better than a description by words. It was called a triclinium. The Jews started using that after the Romans conquered them because they said, hey, that's a pretty neat way to have a group around a table. So that instead of having just one long table and some way down at this end that couldn't even see those at the other end, the Romans always used a triclinium. Depending upon how many would be seated would be seating. The triclinium could grow in size, and whatnot. But tri is 3. And so it will wind up with 3 sections that would accommodate seating people. I'll get a better picture up there. Oops, that's not the one I wanted. Something like that. This is set in some area over in Jerusalem. And you can see the middle section is where extra food was stored, or it's where a servant could enter in there to bring additional food. This was just a sketch or a drawing of that same thing. Here's another picture that was painted that might represent that thing. You can see their own cushions. You didn't sit at chairs. Well, you did. We sit at chairs, and the table was generally this size, about a foot off the floor, and as long or wide as they might need to make it. Here's another one. This is depicting who was sitting where. At least they could, looking at the scriptures, who might have been seated where. You see where Jesus would be seated on one side, John right at his right hand, Judas at his left hand. We'll show a little video in a minute. Peter all the way across at the other end. And the video will explain some of that perhaps. And one other, this is another picture of the same kind of thing. So, let me get back from that. Come on, shrivel up. Yeah, he didn't quite get it right but that's been for years the accepted view of the Lord's table that Michelangelo painted back all those years ago, with Jesus in the middle and everybody then spread out on either side. And that's been entirely incorrect. One of those group of people that viewed that his drawing or his painting of all of that has Mary Magdalene in there. The one on his immediate left that looks more like a woman than a man. They say, well, that was Mary Magdalene who was sitting there as a part of that. That's just somebody's thinking. But let me get this correct here, and we'll see a little bit of this.
There's actually no record of her being at that supper, though.
No, there's no record of that. Come on, let me see the video. Where's my volume? Oh, over here.
I don't think we allow volume.
I had it at home.
Yeah,
Oh, we can't get volume up there?
right, it's coming through. I didn't hook that part up.
Well, Lord, this had good volume. It was 8 minutes of good volume of them explaining in detail this whole business of the triclinium. Okay, well, you got enough of an idea about it right there. But sitting at the right hand of Jesus, if this be the correct delineation of it, you would see it in about that shape. And most of the historians feel like this is probably the right shape of all of that, and it is probably where these 4 were seated. They couldn't tell for sure on the rest of them because there wasn't enough things in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Don't try to set that up, Lowell, if that's where you're going. Let it go. It's not that significant. But Judas, by all the historians say, was right next to Jesus. And they say that based upon the things that we'll see in the Gospels, where he was right next to Jesus, where he could receive the sop. Jesus could not have reached all the way across to where Peter was, or over on that other side, where others might have been, to give him that sop. So John was in the position, the right hand of Jesus. He was in the position of greatest honor. And the second greatest position would be next to Jesus on the other side. So this wasn't accidental. This was just sort of the way things lined up. Peter was where Peter was because he stayed in the doghouse many times. Yes, Mark?
There's 13 places there.
There are.
Yeah, there's 13. You got John, Jesus, Calvin, there's 13.
Why would there be 13?
And then there's 13 places.
13. So you got 12 apostles and 1 Jesus. Would that be 13?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. I think that's the reason there's 13. But anyway, Peter's over there. Thank you for pointing that out, Mark. I know that Lowell didn't get that. He was puzzled about those 13 places. But Peter was over in the place where they put the least of whoever that was at this particular party or get together. So everybody else received a higher place of honor than where Peter sat. The one that sat in this position where Peter sat traditionally would be the one that would wash the feet of the people as they came in. Because he was the servant among all of these. He was the servant to serve the rest of them. And those that know more than I know think that that was purposeful on the part of the Lord, because he's been struggling with Peter and with James and John and the others over the issue of greatness. We've talked about that here in this context in John, that even at this point in time, they were talking about to each other about who would be greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So that was a bone of contention. So, and Peter particularly, he would vote, I vote for Peter being the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So in order to help Peter to kind of slide back more into his place, Jesus put him over here where the least of the apostles would be, in that particular slot, and be the guy who, when the feet washing started, it would be Peter washing the feet. But in order to help Peter, again, I think to emphasize to Peter the importance of being a servant, he that would be great among you, let him be what? Let him be the servant of all. The greatest among you. Jesus told them that when they were discussing who's the greatest. So to reinforce that with Peter, instead of having Peter wash everybody else's feet, who did that?
Jesus washed his, but it's kind of interesting. And when you read that, you kind of get the feeling Peter's the last one to get washed.
Yeah, because he's the one that spoke up and said, nope. When you got to, nope, not going to happen. So anyway, it's interesting that Jesus was still, I think, at this time teaching the things, the principles of the kingdom that they needed so desperately to learn, and were slow of heart to learn those things. So John was leaning on the right-hand side of Jesus, and Peter, all the way across the triclinium, as you saw there, beckoned to John, got his attention some way, and have him ask who he was speaking about, who was the one that would betray him. And he then, lying on Jesus' breast, saith unto him, Lord, who is it? That's what John asked. And here was Jesus' response. Verse 26, he it is to whom I shall give a sop when I have dipped it. And when he had dipped the sop, he gave it to Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon. So that identified for John at least, whether Peter heard this or not, it identified for John at least who it was that was going to be the one that would betray him. And it was going to be the one that the Lord gave the sop to. And that's just what they're talking about is just dip. Just a piece of bread, flat bread. You go to any Mexican restaurant and they'll fry you up some good flat bread, and you can tear off pieces of that and you can use it in the cheese dip or in the whatever kind of dip they have, the guacamole dip, and you can use that for a spoon. They didn't have plastic spoons and forks. They had metal spoons and forks and things like that. Most of if they were wealthy, they had metal. Most of them had wooden ones. And so they would have had some wooden spoons, I'm confident, around on the table. I feel they would probably have. But most commonly was simply to sop, so that you would be doing what you never are supposed to do in polite company, and that is sticking a part of a piece of bread in your mouth and dipping it back into the common dip again, so that your saliva gets in there mixed up with everybody else's, and it's unhealthy to do that, and not polite to do that, and don't do that in good company. When we were over there, we had, of course, we ate a lot together. The group, there was about 15 in our group, ate together for every meal, but one meal in particular was in Jerusalem, and it was up on a hill overlooking the city of Jerusalem at a restaurant there. And they served sop. They had, I counted the dishes on the table, and we sat about 7 or so of us at a table. I counted the dishes on our table, and there were 20 different dishes of stuff, bowls about this size, full of something. I don't know what they were full of, but full of something that you could dip. And there was a lot of flatbread around, and so you get your flatbread and you dip it in the sop. And some of them were pretty tasty, and some of them were pretty bad. Just vegetables crushed up, and whatnot. And one of them they always had at the Passover meal was a mixture of fruit, figs and things like that, and nuts, and those things, you take them and you crush them in honey. And so you've got a very sweet sop there. That tasted wonderfully well. But that was a common dish of the Passover of Jesus' day. So there'd be lots of that on the table for people to eat. So it was just a common practice that they would use the fried bread to do that. And that Jesus dipped it into something, whatever dish was handy, and he gave that to Judas, and Judas partook of that. And after the sop, verse 27, Satan entered into him. And then said Jesus unto him, that thou doest, do quickly. I don't think most of the guys at the table understood exactly what was going on there, because they didn't give us any idea right here about knowing in verse 28. Some thought one thing, some thought another. They did see that Jesus had given him the sop, and they did see that Judas had said something to Jesus, and Jesus had responded to him, whatever you're doing, do it quickly. I don't know if they heard that part or understood that part. If Peter knew what in the world was going on and understood that Judas was the one that was going to betray him, Judas would have not made it out of the upper room. Who had the swords among them? Peter was one of them. I don't know who else had them, but Peter certainly had one. And he wasn't bashful about using it, as we'll see a little bit later on. And he would have stopped him. I have no doubt that he would have stopped Judas from doing what it was that Jesus said he was going to do. So the rest of them weren't aware, particularly about what was doing, and Satan, who has been leading Judas around by the nose for quite a while, is continuing to lead him around by the nose again. And Luke 23:3. That's not what I wanted, because it's the wrong chapter. And this is Luke's account of the same thing. And Satan entered into Judas, named Iscariot, being of the number of the 12, and he went his way and continued with the chief priests and captains, how he might betray him unto them. And they were glad, and they covenanted to give him money, and he promised and sought opportunity to betray him. Now Luke doesn't go on to say how much money. John doesn't say how much money. Mark doesn't say how much money, but Matthew does. That he bargained with them, communed with them for 30 pieces of silver, which was a little money, but wasn't a lot of money. At the exchange rate today, it would value about the highest value I saw that anyone placed upon those 30 pieces of silver would be $450. The lowest value I saw was $90. So somewhere along in there. Do it quickly. So the devil was, pardon?
I'm sure Jesus would have forgave him if he had ever acted.
Do what now?
I'm sure Jesus would have forgave him
Oh,
if he would have ever repented and asked for it.
what makes you think that, Larry?
Because he forgave everybody.
Did he forgive Peter? Yeah, he forgave Peter.
I've talked to a lot of people that believe that Jesus was just an instrument used, and he had no choice in that. But I know for a fact, reading in the Bible, he's seen all the miracles Jesus performed and everything he done, and how he could not be and still do what he did. He wasn't just an instrument used.
Yeah. If it was strictly a political issue with Judas, if he was just doing this in order to push Jesus to declare his kingship and for him to get on the throne quicker, then why was Judas affected the way he was? This was, Judas had a bad heart. Somewhere there's a verse of scripture that tells us that he was a thief. And I noted that down somewhere, but I don't remember where I put it.
Well, Jesus was warning him, even in 670, he said to one of y'all was dead.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I'm sure Jesus probably let his breath off.
Yeah. Yes, Lord.
It's pretty easy to see that when Jesus was arrested, he didn't defend himself. That went completely different in my vision of the situation.
Mm-hmm.
What Judas expected.
Yeah.
He thought, okay, there could be a revolt here. We'll get it started.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yeah.
and I'm not saying it was or wasn't that way. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's another possibility.
That could be.
I don't know who wrote that. I could
Well, give him credit for at least writing that, Larry. It may be true.
Put Mary Magdalene at the supper.
Do what now? Oh, yeah, same guy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's who wrote it.
Same guy said
I
that.
heard the same thing said about Pharaoh.
Uh-huh.
Same scenario.
Yeah.
That wouldn't surprise me about Pharaoh, though.
I'm
Yeah.
talking about being a pawn that God used to show his power and all that.
Yeah.
Pharaoh had no choice in the matter, but we know better.
Yeah. We all have the freedom of will and of choice. Judas had his freedom of will, and he chose to allow himself to be used for this purpose. He had his own motivation, whatever it was, whether it was the money or whether it was political or whatever it might be, that caused him to move in this direction, and Satan created the opportunity, then used this as an opportunity to bring this about this betrayal of the Lord and this ultimate death of Judas himself, because of all the things he was planning and plotting and doing. So we've got, and this is the second time that the scriptures speak about Satan having entered into him. It's not as so often depicted in, at least I don't think it is, in the movies that Hollywood makes, like The Exorcist and things like that, where the demon just somehow or another has been floating around and they just pick somebody out and, they go in. Mark?
In 13, verse 18, I do not speak of all of you. I know the ones I have chosen, but it's that scripture may be fulfilled. So Judas was chosen to fulfill the scripture.
Right.
He already knew that he was going to be the way Judas is.
Yeah.
He was used to the way Judas is.
Yeah. Jesus has already cited, or he will be citing, the fact, quoting out of the book of Psalms, where David had written that, the guy sitting at the table with me, my own friend, is the one that betrays me. And so that's not any, that was not a prediction, that was a prophecy. And we talked about the difference between prediction and prophecy last Wednesday night. And it certainly would come to pass. And it came to pass in Judas. If it had not been fulfilled in Judas, it could have been fulfilled in one of the others, but it wasn't. Judas was the candidate, and Jesus knew all along who it was that was going to betray him, because he's, again, God in the flesh.
From the beginning of the world.
Yeah. Yeah. This goes all the way back to Genesis and to the bruising of the serpent's head and the snipping at the heels of Jesus in Genesis 3:15. All of that in the ability or the power of God to know the future as well as you and I know the past, or better than we know the past. It's all just there in the mind of God, so that when he created Adam and Eve, he was not shocked by the unfolding of the events when Eve actually partook of the fruit. And when Adam, with Eve's encouragement, partook of the fruit, he understood, even when he gave them the commandment, that they would violate the commandment. All of that. And what we puzzle over is, how can God know those things without determining those things? So we call that, in some people's interpretation, predestination. That God determines all of those kinds of things beforehand, and we're just pawns in the hand of God, and he just moves the pieces, chess pieces, around wherever it wants him to go, and he moved me in the path of the queen, and the queen gobbled me up. So it wasn't my fault. And again, that's not true. Oh.
There's a verse that says God predestined those that would be saved.
Sure.
And that predestined is the salvation of the people that would choose that.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't predestine the individuals. He predestined the action that would give them salvation.
The means by which that would occur. He predetermined before time exactly how it would be that he would save us. He had said, the soul that sinneth, it shall die, and he meant exactly that. And he predetermined, at the time that he determined that the soul that sins would die, he predetermined how it would be that dead soul would be resurrected. And it would be through the blood of his Son, the Lamb of God that taketh away the sin of the world. And Again, it didn't do anything to the power of choice. And God's knowing these things ahead of time doesn't mean that he determines these things ahead of time. He predestines certain things that will occur in this world. He predestines opportunities and brings us into contact with that opportunity where we make a choice about how we will respond to that. When we first heard the gospel, might have been your mom and dad or somebody like that had taken you to church, or maybe some friend had invited you or something along that line. But the opportunity was created, and you were brought into contact with the opportunity and given a choice about what you would do about that. But the choice is always ours. Now, this was Judas's doing. Was the devil involved? Sure he was. But not any more so with Judas than he is with us on a daily basis. Those kinds of opportunities and choices are before us constantly. That's why we talk about doing the right thing. Well, we have to come into contact with the right thing before we can ever have a chance to do the right thing. So when we get in that position, we make a decision about, well, we'll do it, and no, we won't do it. We'll do the wrong thing instead of the right thing. Judas did the wrong thing here. And, the Lord knew how that was going to play out. So the devil showed up here at this time. He'll show up at all kinds of places, uninvited, no personal invitation at all. He just shows up. When he showed up in the book of Job, what was God doing in the book of Job? First chapter.
Well, they were having a meeting,
Mm-hmm.
and when God asked him, where have you been? He said, well, I've been around, looking around for somebody.
Yeah.
It's him. That's not the word he used, but
Yeah.
that's exactly what he's saying.
Yeah.
I'm able to do whatever I want to do, and I do my way with people.
Yep. Going to and fro within the earth. All walking all up and down in it, everywhere around it, wherever he wants to go. That's where he is, and that's where he was. And looking at things, looking for opportunities to have his way. Of course, he was constantly then and is now challenging the authority of God and the right of God to rule over the things that God has made.
But he gave the impression that he always won. And that's why God told you have to try
Yeah.
my servant Job.
Yeah. Devil was lying, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah. Imagine that.
I can't believe it. Jesus said in John 8:44, he's a liar, and he's the father of lies, still is today. Unbelievable in the things that he will tell us or will promise us about life. So after getting this off from Jesus, Satan entered into him, and Jesus said unto him, what you do quickly. Now no man at the table knew for what intent he spake this unto him. Couldn't figure out exactly what was going on with all this, just knew that Judas got up and left. For some of them thought, because Judas had the bag, that Jesus had said unto him, buy those things we have need of against the feast, or that he should give something to the poor. So that's kind of what they thought about that. The King James translation here says that they thought that because Judas had the bag and that Jesus had said some of these things to him.
Go back to verse 26 and read that off to the side.
He it is to whom I shall give us.
Select 26, so highlight it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Now, read that off to the right.
The commentary part.
Yes.
Jesus replied by whispering, for had he spoken out, the rest could not have been so ignorant. Right? Yeah, and that certainly could be true. They certainly did not understand why Jesus had sent. So they just supposed that because it was common among them to give things to the poor or to buy for the feast. I mean, somebody's got to pay for that meal for 13 people. And so it's just to be expected that Judas would be the one that did that. So Judas was a thief, kept the bag. John doesn't specifically say that he was a thief. Let's look at some other translations. some of them thought, I'm sorry?
Did we study a while back about Judas being a zealot?
A zealot? I don't know, we talked about zealots. Was Judas a zealot? I can't remember.
No, he was Judean.
Do what?
He was from Judea.
Yeah, he was from Judea. Yeah. Simon was a zealot. I know, spoken of as Simon the zealot. Well, I'm not finding the verse I was wanting to find. So maybe that's not it. Let me go back to where I was.
Where Judas was the one back in verse 12, was talking about complaining about the lady put the funeral.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
On that money.
Wasting all that money. Could have been sold for 300 pence and given to the poor. What now? John 12? John 12, that's the verse that I was looking for. I couldn't find it in my notes. Let me get back to John 12 and verse 6. Okay. That's when he said that about the woman in the ointment. And he said that not because he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and had the bag. And so these are the translations then about that as well, that said he would steal from it. The CEV asks this because he carried the money bag and sometimes would steal from it. He used to help himself from it. The English Standard Version, English Standard Version Plus, he was a thief. King James, of course, said he was a thief, that verse. He was a thief. LSV, the Passion Translation, he would steal money whenever he wanted from the funds. So it was apparent that Judas had those problems and he was indeed a thief. All right, back in John. Thank you for that verse that I overlooked. So he then, having received the sop, went immediately out, and it was nighttime. Therefore, when he was gone out, verse 31, Jesus said, so Judas is no longer a part of these things forward. The next time they'll bump into Judas is when he comes with the crowd in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he kisses the cheek of Jesus to signify exactly which one in that darkness was the Lord. Now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him, Jesus said. This is the unfolding of the eternal purpose of God. It started way back yonder, book of Genesis, as we cited a moment ago, being the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world. All of the sacrifices that were offered, from the first sacrifices of animals to provide the clothing for Adam and Eve, to the last sacrifice given before the old law passed away, all of those sacrifices, millions of lambs that were offered, and of rams and of doves and others, all of those were about to come to an end, because the Son of Man is now glorified and God is glorified in him. Verse 32, if God be glorified in him, and he was, God shall also glorify him in himself, and shall straightway glorify him. Immediately, just in the next few days as it was coming up, all of this would come to pass. And the miracles that were about to be done, and the things that were going to be said when they came to get Jesus there in the Garden of Gethsemane, and they had however many were with them. I don't know how many they took to accomplish that task, but there was quite a few there to accomplish that task. They had already agreed together, Judas had, with the commander of whatever Jewish soldiers were accompanying them that night, that I'll kiss the guy and you'll know who it is, and everything will be fine from that point forward. And so that's exactly what happened. But you had all these events that unfolded to the glory of God. We had those guys when Jesus asked the crowd that had come, "Whom seek ye?" They said, "Jesus of Nazareth." And what did Jesus say? "Here I am. I'm he." And when he said that, what happened?
They fell to the ground.
Yeah, they fell to the ground. You know, if you were one of those guys that were there coming to arrest the Lord, and that happened when he identified himself, and the next thing you knew, you were trying to get yourself up off of the dirt or out of the dirt, you would wonder, how did that happen?
The wrong guys ran off.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, there was those signs that were there. There was the confession of the centurion that was in charge of the crucifixion of the Lord, that when he saw the way Jesus conducted himself on the cross and how he interacted with Mary and the other women and John himself, and as he watched all of these things, what he said to the other thieves and how he interacted with the other thieves even during the time of his suffering. The centurion that was in charge said, truly, this guy's the Son of God. You had the darkness that came over the land from 9 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon, something like that, 6 hours of darkness. You had, at the time of the death of Jesus, you had the earthquake that shook the stones. You had the dead people coming out of the graves after Jesus' resurrection that were buried in the various cemeteries in and around Jerusalem, in the various tombs, and walking around, people seeing them walking around. I've always wondered what happened to those guys. You know, did they get sick and die again? Were they just translated up to heaven after this brief exposure? Or they certainly had a story to tell after having been raised from the dead.
Larry,
Yes.
I was still searching Judas. And
Oh, thank you.
Matthew 27:3, let me read that to you.
Please do.
Then Judas, which had betrayed him, when he saw that he was condemned, repented himself, and brought again the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders.
Yeah. So there's the 30 pieces and how Judas felt about that. If he repented himself, then repentance is a change. I don't know exactly what changed in Judas, his thinking about what he had done, his thinking about the motivation if it was political, and thought he would force the hand of Jesus here some way or another, if that was the case. None of that happened. Nothing played out the way Judas thought it would play out. And he said, I told the guys that he brought the money back to, he said, I messed up. I've betrayed innocent blood. You're not guilty. And what was their response to Judas?
What's that to us?
You think we care about that? We don't care about that. Don't care about you. We got what we wanted. He's in jail. Okay, we'll stop there and pick up next Wednesday.